Hi, I'm Robert Jacobson, and I'm here with my good friend Samuel Coniglio. And we're here to talk today about his new book and other things related to space. Sam, great to see you today.
Good to see you, sir.
So, first, without bearing the lead, let's just jump right in on who you are and just a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into something about the book, because you have a pretty cool history that's sort of, in a way, a little unconventional, or maybe not obvious route into space, and I think folks would really appreciate hearing about some of your origin story.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I took a very unusual approach. Where should I begin? First job out of college was working for a company called McDonnell Douglas at the Kennedy Space Center. I was a technical writer. And for those of you who don't know what a technical writer is, basically my job is to translate geek into English. I work with the engineers and scientists and take their research and document it, put it into reports and job aids and papers and eventually web pages and stuff like that. I actually built the first website for McDonnell Douglas at the Kennedy Space Center way back in the day. But yeah, so it was very interesting because 1990 got the job working the Kennedy Space Center, and for about 5 years I was there working on space shuttle and space station documentation. I was right there in the middle of that, saw about a dozen shuttle flights. It was awesome. It was really cool. I got to be like right there at the front lines where the 3-mile marker is before the launches take place. Really neat. Yeah, so it was a very interesting adventure. One of the interesting things that happened while I was there, besides documenting space shuttle and space station stuff, McDonnell Douglas, the company, received a contract from the DoD. And it was a very unusual contract, actually, because, McDonnell Douglas is a big company. They do aerospace work, military work, and all that stuff. And the project was called the Delta Clipper Experimental. And for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, basically it's the world's first reusable rocket ship. Designed and built by McDonnell Douglas under a contract with the DoD under the Strategic Defense Initiative Organization, if anybody remembers the Ronald Reagan Star Wars thing. But this was early 1990s when this was happening, mid 1990s. They had limited funding, maybe $95 million. That's, of course, a drop in the bucket for the DoD. But McDonnell Douglas worked hard to build this vehicle. It was basically an X vehicle. It was basically a prototype just to test the concept of reusability. Can you take a rocket, launch in the air, and land? Launch in the air and land again and again and again. Rinse and repeat. Just amazing. So it took and this was a very disciplined crew of people. And in like 18 months, they went from design to a functioning rocket. I mean, it was just amazing. Just getting all the tests, getting the whole vehicle put together. They basically begged, borrowed, and stole all the equipment, trying to get everything together, calling upon the aviation team for avionics and different departments throughout, St. Louis and Huntington Beach and Florida and other parts of the country, built this vehicle. And you're probably wondering, what am I talking about? Well, show and tell time. This is a Delta Clipper Experimental. It flew from 1991 through 1996, flew about a dozen times. Initially under DoD support, and then, strangely enough, switched to NASA at the very end. The last 4 flights were run by NASA. But this was the first fully reusable rocket ship. And there's a lot of stories behind this, because without this rocket, Blue Origin and probably SpaceX would not exist. This is the source, the idea, where you could fully reuse a rocket ship. And the concepts that were developed for this project inspired Blue Origin and eventually SpaceX. So, and that's a topic of like another book I want to work on.
I mean, can you give a little brief bit about like the Blue Origin parts?
Yeah. So there's a lot more than just simply the technology. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of activism. A group called the Space Frontier Foundation was founded not too long before this project started. And they were a bunch of activists who wanted to bring private space industry into the fold. Why was NASA like the only place to go for going into space? So these private individuals were trying to find ways to get funding to build rockets on their own. Why does it have to go through NASA? Why can't we find alternative ways? And so the problem was these activists and engineers could not find funding from private sources. Investors would not take them seriously. It was like NASA was the be all and end all for space from the 1970s till 1960s through 2010, basically. It was very, very difficult to get funding for private space projects. A lot of people tried, a lot of people failed, but at least they tried. And it wasn't until the folks came in who had tons of money, like billions of dollars to burn, that they were able to get something off the ground. So with the idea of Blue Origin, what happened was when this project finished in 1996, about a year or so afterwards, representatives from Jeff Bezos contacted some of the chief engineers involved with this project and say, hey, this is really neat. Can we get the engineering designs for this? We were very curious about it. We'd like to make a private one. And we said, hell yeah. So basically plans were handed to Jeff Bezos on a silver platter for this vehicle, and Blue Origin was born.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So Sam, back to some of your own personal story. When I first met you, I saw you taking photographs at a conference. I don't remember where it was, but and later learned that you've had your fingers and toes in many different activities, and it seems to really you have a very kind of Renaissance attitude, borrowing from the past, looking at the future, compiling things. We'll get to your book, and I see a distillation of some of your passions and interests within this book. Tell us a bit about like some of your, how you're doing kind of web digital work for folks on the consulting and corporate side, and photography, and advocating about some areas within space that weren't necessarily obvious. They were, not just about the hard engineering, but some of the more cultural and even artistic and design-oriented thinking that was not necessarily at the forefront of the conversation when it comes to private space, commercial space advocacy.
Yes. So my story is kind of strange. Since I was not an engineer, it was really hard to get a job in the aerospace industry. Pretty much, if you wanted to work for a space company, you had to be some kind of an engineer, or at least have the engineer label somewhere on there. As a technical writer, I was kind of like an afterthought. It was like, oh yeah, maybe somebody should go and actually document the stuff. But usually it's the engineers that documented their own stuff, which quality was so-so. But after 5 years working at the Kennedy Space Center, the bureaucracy was starting to get to me. Also, the low salary was getting to me, and I was like, I realized I needed to move on. And so I had to make a decision and leave the aerospace world for a while and just be a job shopper, be a contractor. And so I became a technical writer for various .coms and startups and computer companies all over the country, traveled all over the US, ended up in Silicon Valley, and I started doing contract jobs with Apple and Google and Meta and all these other companies doing support and tech work. But behind the scenes, I was still a space activist. And so I work very closely with folks like John Spencer at the Space Tourism Society, learning a lot about private space travel, learning a lot about another side of the space industry that most people didn't know about, which is like someone who's not involved with NASA, groups that were trying to create private space companies and get private funding to build alternatives to what NASA has. Because, I hate to say it, but NASA was kind of a monopoly. It was like, if you want to go to space, you had the space shuttle. That's it. You want to go to the space station, you had to go to the US space station. That's it. Done. There was no private alternative. There was no other options. And space is a huge place. You can have almost anything going on out there. There's unlimited resources out there. But at the time, from the 1990s to the early 2000s, it was pretty much NASA. If you want to go to space, you got to do your project through NASA, typically like a university grant or something like that, or some company who's a contractor or a subcontractor of the big 5 companies that helped us get to the moon in the first place. It's funny how Those same 5 companies are still around, Boeing and Lockheed and Northrop. The same 5 companies that helped us get to the moon, they're still NASA contractors to this day, and their quality's kind of gone down a bit. But anyways, we're trying to, from my background, been an activist since the beginning, since 1996, getting involved with private space industry, with the world of space tourism, because I thought, hey, I want to go to space. You want to go to space. Everybody wants to go to space. Do we all have to be superhuman astronauts? Do we all have to have 3 PhDs and be ex-military to fly into space and deal with the very tough recruitment system to get eligible? Or is there a way for us to buy a ticket and go? How can we make that happen? So I got heavily involved with a group of people that were trying to find alternatives and private options. What else is out there? How else can we fly into space? Can we actually fly into space for fun? Shocking. Oh my God. Have fun in space? I mean, you're not an engineer, you're not doing like a project. And also trying to find artists and creative people to get involved, because what the astronauts have figured out is that, space is beautiful, but they don't have the words to articulate the beauty of space. And many of them said, we need a poet up there. We need an artist to help explain what's going on. And so I've worked with a lot of artists and fashion people and designer folks who are trying to bring art into space. So it's a very unusual background. It's not a straightforward, I'm an engineer working on engineering project ABC. I'm kind of a jack of all trades.
Cool. And so let's jump in on your book. And thanks for that background, Sam. So we've got Creature Comforts in Space, your book. And it's a great book, and I want to tell folks it's got some really. I know Sam I heard about this process from Sam directly as he's working on it. And there's a lot of love, attention to detail. There's some great illustrations and images and color, because he really wanted to represent the full spectrum of what. Or at least trying to go for a full spectrum of what space can be about for like the rest of us or all of humanity. So Sam, tell us about the inspiration, why did you write this book? Why now?
Well, it actually is 30 years in the making. I've been doing a series of presentations called Designing for Space Tourism for many years, and I will be going to ISDC and other space conferences around the country, talking about the potentials of this industry and potentials of private space travel and individuals trying to go into space. And the fact that there is a bit of a space tourism industry right now. You have what we call ground-based space tourism at the lowest level, where you go to the science centers, you go to Kennedy Space Center Visitor Center, or Johnson Space Center Spaceport Houston, or some of these other places that you can do right now, or go to your local science center, and you're having the experience of the planetarium and pretending you're in space right there. And then even it's more simpler than that. Video games. There's a lot of space-based video games out there. You have the experience like, oh, I'm flying the spaceship and fighting your lasers against the aliens, blah, blah, blah. You're getting that space experience right here at the lowest level. The next level up would be doing things like the zero gravity airplane rides. The company called Zero G. You can actually pay for a trip right now and do parabolic airplane flights and get the real thing. You get the actual real Zero G experience. There's a company called Space Perspective that's trying to do high altitude balloon flights to the edge of space. So you get another perspective, getting really close to the outer edge of the universe, outer edge of the Earth. And then, of course, the real thing, contacting SpaceX or Space Adventures, which is one of the earliest space tourism companies, to go through real training in Russia to learn how to be an astronaut, cosmonaut, and go through the process of flying into space and go to the International Space Station. So a number of people have done that. Plus Jared Isaacman is doing his amazing work with his own, basically a private space program, working with SpaceX directly. And he's about to do a flight, I think, at the end of the month. I think
it's August 2024, and he's aiming to do his second flight end of August. That's what SpaceX has on their manifest. And they're attempting to do a spacewalk with, from a Falcon in SpaceX spacesuits, and it'll be the first, I guess, private EVA or spacewalk, if you want to
Yeah.
call it.
So about the book, getting back to the book,
Yes.
the reason I started writing, well, I wrote several drafts of this book over the years in many different variations for various forms. But it wasn't until 2021, when over a dozen people flew on private spaceships, that I realized, okay, the time is right. The time is right. I have a picture for you if you want. I can show you a picture of all the people who are going up there. And it was pretty amazing. People flying on Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, and on SpaceX at different altitudes or going all the way up into orbit. And it was amazing to have all this happening in 1 year. And by the way, we were in a pandemic, I think, at the same time. So really amazing stuff. So I said, okay, the time is right. Why is the time right? Well, we know what life is like on the International Space Station, and they've done a lot of work of just, they're doing science and they have some basic stuff for people to, survive up there. But the analogy is, it's still like going on a camping trip. You still like going on your RV, and you have to conserve your water and conserve your resources, and you only have so much food and only so much drink, and you have to be careful with how much you consume and being able to survive in a very small, cramped environment. And a lot of compromise you have to make to your lifestyle just to stay alive. So this book, Creature Comforts in Space, addresses the issues of just daily living, the things that you enjoy to do every day in your life, like taking a shower, doing your laundry, going to the bathroom. The stuff you do at home every day is like, no big deal. But in this extreme environment, it's a big deal. It's a challenge to just do the fundamentals. Like right now, for example, you cannot wash your clothes in space. There is no washing machine. There is no dryer up there. The astronauts basically use their clothes until they fall apart. So I wanted to dive deep into all these issues, and I use my friends as a guide, and I have a whole list of creature comforts here. These are extremely subjective things. A creature comfort is a very personal item of something you like to do, a habit, a thing you do every day, something that makes you feel good and comfortable and safe. Can you apply this to space? Does it make sense to apply it to space? Can you bring it up there? And so I thought, well, this is a good jumping off point. I was like, from there, I talk about clothing. I talk about bathrooms. I talk about farming. I talk about recycling materials. I talk about how some of these things that we develop for off-world living, like a homestead in space, that's the analogy I use, could possibly be brought back to Earth. Because, as you know about NASA space spinoffs, there's a lot of things we learn when we have to create a technology that adapts to a new environment. We can bring it back to Earth and find new ways to new products, new services, new systems, new infrastructure that will make life easier and better on Earth.
Sam, could you explain a little bit about what homesteading is? Because there might be some people who might be unfamiliar with the term.
So homesteading is basically you're on a farm in the middle of nowhere. You're building it from scratch. Number one, you got to see if there's any water. You got to drill a well so you have at least something to drink and you can stay alive. And then B, you got to build a farm, you got to build a barn, you got to build a house, you got to get a livestock, you have to get all the fundamentals for just living. How are you going to eat? Where are you going to sleep? You got to worry about the weather and the elements. And homesteading is what they used to do back in the Old West when you were just trying to settle and in the different parts of the United States in the early days, in the 1800s. People still do homesteading to this day. There are a lot of folks that live in farms in remote parts of the country, and they like it out there because it's quiet and they're very self-sufficient. They're not worried about infrastructure. One thing that us modern 21st century people just forget about is that there is a lot of infrastructure in place that helps us survive. There are sewer treatment plants. There's water treatment plants. You've got electrical grids being run by companies and organizations or the city to help keep the city working. But when you're out in the middle of nowhere, it's just you. You have to be your own fire department. You have to be your own sewage treatment plant. You have to deal with all these different things. So you have to learn how to work off the grid. So using that as an analogy for outer space, because you're really way out far away from everything, from civilization. How do you recycle? How do you farm? How do you do maximum reuse of all the resources you got?
Thank you, Sam. So for you, outside of just being offered a ticket to go to the International Space Station like tomorrow, what would be sort of what are some of the minimum creature comforts you would ideally like to see, even if they're not available yet? Are there two or three?
Well, I definitely like a cup of tea, you know.
Okay.
And so back in 2016, a company called Lavazza, which is famous for their espresso machines, actually teamed up with an engineering firm called Argotech to design and develop the world's first uh, espresso machine for space. And it was called the ISS Espresso. And astronaut Samantha Christopher Reddy flew up with it and installed it on the International Space Station. And it was able to boil water and also create proper espressos and coffees and teas using its patented system to make proper coffee and tea, because it's a bit of a challenge to do that up there in space. So that was a really cool experiment. Why we don't have more of that is another question, because it's time to build a proper kitchen in space. They have a multi-purpose area on the International Space Station, but we need a galley. We need a proper space galley on a spaceship to supply all sorts of foods, whether it's automated in the case of like having a robot create the food for you, to, I just want to make a sandwich myself, blah, blah. But we need a proper galley in space with a good sized refrigerator. They don't have decent sized refrigerators. All the fridges they use right now are for science experiments. I think they have one refrigerator the size of a microwave oven for personal stuff. So lots of little things that we take for granted are not available there, because the focus is science. The focus is on the work, not the humans. So creature comforts could include just getting a good drink, or cooking good food, or getting fresh food. That's a nice idea. Other creature comforts could be just comfortable clothes. Clean clothes. It would be nice if we had clean clothes. And I actually talk about some experiments and concepts for designing a washing machine that works in space, that uses very little water and just enough soap to clean the clothes and dry it and stuff like that. Those little things, those little fundamentals. And then, of course, play, entertainment. I propose a gymnasium in space, where it could be a new type of, you invent basketball and new types of sports, and you can have yoga, and you can do other types of activities, dancing, and people need to express themselves and stretch out and have some fun, because if you're in cramped quarters all the time, you're going to go stir crazy. And there's lots of research done on folks who work in Antarctica, or Navy people live in submarines. You have to be a certain type of person to tolerate that cramped environment for a long period of time. Most of us would not be able to stand it. So you need to find out, how can we make life easier for people living up there?
Do you feel that things like VR and immersive environments will be helpful up there? Have you thought about that? Or and what's your take on that? Or even as a tool here on Earth to give people space style experiences, or space themed experiences?
The VR stuff is neat, and I've actually did a couple of these. I think it was called the Infinite was one of those projects, where basically you put the VR goggles on and you walk around a giant room and you feel like you're actually walking in the International Space Station. That was a kind of a neat simulation. Up there in space, I'm not sure. I mean, it's already a cramped environment, and then you're putting these goggles on. It might make you even more nauseous. Who knows? Because you're floating, and then you're wearing these goggles, and you're going, whoa! So you don't have much stability there. And also, it's like, well, you're there in that environment, and you put the goggles on and what? You're going to pretend you're back on Earth in like a forest or a garden? Maybe, but it's, once again, it's a simulation. The VR is good for training. VR is good for simulating certain environments on Earth. I don't know. I mean, they're testing it out on the space station right now, but I don't know if there's any real viable product for it yet, or need for it yet. I'm still a little skeptical. The jury's still out on that side of things.
And Sam, let's talk about the importance of that. It seems like design is already being taken into account for some of these new private commercial space stations. I guess NASA calls them CLDs, what they call commercial LEO destinations or living destinations. But essentially these private ones. And I've noticed that there's been announcements about partnerships with hotels and world-renowned designers. So I guess design is making its way in terms of whether it's just an advertising feature, or actually it's going, or maybe it will be utilized. I hope it's the latter. What's your take? What's your take on some of the developments with the commercial destinations?
I think we need more designers. Industrial designers and space architects are starting to become very, very important, or at least being recognized as being very important key elements for these private space startups. Design, design, design helps us innovate, helps us create and break out of the box. For decades, NASA and the contractors have all been focused on engineering, focused on, okay, let's build this thing, let's design this thing. But they're not very good at, I mean, some of them really good designers. That's granted, they are some really good ones out there, but we need more out of the box thinking with actual artists, heaven forbid, actual artists working with engineers to build a thing. Shocking. I've seen a number of amazingly creative innovations when artists and engineers work together. It's just amazing. I go to this little desert festival you may have heard of called Burning Man, and it's like insane, some of the art pieces that they build. And there's engineers working with the artists to create these giant sculptures, some of which move, some of which light up, some of which do different things. I've seen some where they have sensors that will like link up to, like, whenever a satellite flies overhead, a light turns on or something like that. It's very neat innovation going on there. We just need more creative input, have the engineers working with these out of the box thinkers and design differently than what we've been doing before. That, I think, will help with innovation and speed the growth of a viable, diversified space economy.
Tourism, there's always debate in how much of a component tourism is or could be. What is your vision for people both visiting space and living in space? I mean,
so when it comes to tourism, it's very important to look at history. And I'm a history guy and was big into steampunk and all that fun stuff. If you look at the early days of railroads, if you look at the early days of automobiles, if you look at the early days of the airline industry, it was definitely the realm of the wealthy. They were the ones who could afford those trips, could afford those vehicles and go on these adventures. And they helped jumpstart a broader industry that eventually brought the prices down for the masses, that we can all take advantage of it. So those early days are the early days of innovation. Trying to create a system or infrastructure and technology is not just technology, there's all these other things to help support an industry. And it takes time. It may take decades sometimes to build that industry up. Folks like Howard Hughes starting building up an airline industry that helped us eventually pioneer what we have today. But yeah, having these private space tourists going up in maybe private space stations or private super yachts, that's one of the terms we use, orbital cruise ships or orbital super yachts, because we use those analogies because they're also out in an ocean, but then this is the case, the ocean of space. Having an innovative place, a place for private individuals to play, a hotel in space, a place where they can actually have fun and do things. The lessons learned of doing that, when you have people who are not fully trained astronauts going up there and playing and innovating and doing things, maybe some science stuff as well, will help us find ways to improve the safety levels, improve the quality levels, improve the lifestyle levels for day-to-day living in any type of a space station or habitat, or even the moon and Mars.
You mentioned lifestyle. You had a previous effort, I think, called Cosmic Lifestyle Corporation, and I would love to share both. If you have a little show and tell about what that project was about, and maybe some of the lessons, some of the frank lessons learned. I know it was, a bit of a roller coaster.
Yeah. So, back in the early 2000s with the Space Tourism Society, I was designing concepts for lifestyles in space, and one of which was a zero gravity cocktail glass. That was inspired by astronaut Donald Pettit, who he actually created the first zero gravity coffee cup in space. One of the challenges of living in space is understanding fluid flow and fluid dynamics, because without gravity, surface tension is king. Water becomes blobs. Blobs stick to everything. It's a big mess. But Donald Pettit was doing these science experiments where he learned about fluid flow and mechanics and how to move stuff around passively without having to have pumps, and created the first coffee cup in space. So I was inspired by that because I hang out with these wacky people who build robots and artists who are also involved with these robot projects. And I created these robots that serve cocktails, which is hilarious. I make cocktail making robots, built 3 of them over the years. And I found out about the zero gravity cocktail glass coffee cup being built. And I was like, ooh, this is really neat. What if we had drinks in space? What can we do? So I work with some artist and engineer friends. I have a friend of mine who's a Hollywood prop maker, another guy who's a master robot builder and an awesome CAD designer. And we designed the first zero gravity cocktail glass. And let's take out the fancy display case here. You can see it up close. So this was our design. It looks like a martini glass. You would inject the fluids through here. Through a robot, we'll have a robot, of course, to mix the drink and then inject it in here, and then it would go into the glass here. This is an open lid. In space, all of the containers are closed because the liquids like to seep out and just get out of the straw or get out of the Capri Sun bag that they have there. They just like to seep away. So you have to have a cover. This does not need a cover. It's optional. The idea is that the liquids will be stuck in the grooves, because if the grooves are at a certain angle, the liquids will stay in place. And you have a single point for sucking to drink the liquids. And the liquids will stay in this place here. And you can just have this glass float around and you'll be fine. So it was a really neat little concept. And in 2013, 14, 15, I started a company called Cosmic Lifestyle Corp with worked with a celebrity bartender, as well as my engineer friends, prop fabricator friends, trying to create maybe we can market this thing, maybe we can sell it, even try to go for a patent on this thing. Patents are expensive, dang. We've got really close several times, worked with a company called Made in Space. They were very excited about this project, and we got really close to possibly 3D printing on the space station, until NASA Public Affairs found out. It's like, no, we can't talk about alcohol in space. No, you can't have that. So that kiboshed that. We were talking with Virgin Galactic, possibly doing a flight with this, or maybe use this as a celebratory drinking glass you get after you return from your Virgin Galactic flight. And then an accident happened and someone died, and then they just stopped talking to us completely. It wasn't our fault. Virgin Galactic's gone through a lot. They had a flight, you can read about it. It's a mess. But anyway, so a lot of close calls. I did a Kickstarter campaign, couldn't raise the funding. Oh, well. And also, I've learned a lot about business and how not to do a business, because, you got to have more than just this and just an idea. So anyways, I learned a lot. It was a fun little project, fun little experiment. Maybe one day I'll actually get to fly this on a zero-G plane. I would love to do that sometime and just do the actual experiment with the liquids floating on this thing. So yeah, that's it.
Do you think what would be one or two key lessons that you learned that you could share with the public?
Definitely have people with better business sense and marketing sense with you, because when it comes to an idea, it requires not just an engineer and not just a designer, but you need people with good business chops, good marketing chops, who understand how to market and sell and mass produce a thing, and also determine, is this a minimum viable product? Is this marketable? Or is this just a gimmick that's, you just get on eBay or something like that? There's lots of different things. We had our ideas pie in the sky, like, oh, we're going to fly this on the space station, do all this stuff, but it was a lot more complicated. And yeah, I think getting a diversified team for your business is important. People who have the sense of, what works, what doesn't work. Also, people who are very well organized. I was the organizer, but we needed more business savvy people involved with us.
Cool. Thank you, Sam. What about going back to sort of the creature comforts in the topic of sustainability? Since being in space, you're in a resource constrained environment, a frontier extreme environment. What are some areas that you see from the research from your book? Have you seen some areas that might be applicable back to Earth and terrestrial concerns in the, within the coming 10 years, or other things that you see some possibilities where doing further development for the space environment would probably have some tangible benefits or use cases back here on terra firma?
Yeah, water. Anything related to water is a big deal. We're now having water shortages all over the world. Global climate change is causing all sorts of chaos to the environment. We need to be extremely conservative with water and how to recycle things better and how to process things better. We're used to having these, water treatment plants and sewage treatment plants for processing our water. It's a centralized place. You have an entire city and all their water is being sent to this central place. Well, in my research, I learned about things called wastewater gardening and septic systems and other alternatives that are local, where literally you just use your backyard as your wastewater processing system. And you can literally use your water, your wastewater, at least your gray water. Maybe the black water has to be processed, but you can use a lot of that gray water for your gardening. And it's okay. So there are different techniques we can use locally for processing the water without having to grab even more water to help water your plants. If you have, you're flushing that toilet every day, you're taking a shower every day, that water could actually be, the shower water at least, could be diverted to your garden. Same thing with the washing machine water. That can be diverted to the garden. California actually has a couple programs to help support that. The black water stuff, by the way, gray water is the terminology is also very useful. If you've ever gone camping or an RV, you learn this stuff here. Gray water is, of course, stuff from your sink, from your shower, from your laundry, which can be lightly filtered and can be used again to water your plants and stuff like that. Black water, of course, is pee and poo and stuff like that, which, you can't just simply drop it into the ground. I mean, you could process this a little bit and then do it. But septic systems do that. They actually have a whole process for separating the solids and the liquids and eventually putting it into a drain field for letting certain plants process the wastewater. In my book, I talk about a space version of that, a space version of a wastewater gardening system. On the ISS right now, they can finally recycle the urine that the astronauts have to water again, and they can process that out. Can't do it with the number 2 though yet. But in my book, I talk about how we can use something that nature's been doing for millions of years, which is poo is great fertilizer. You just have to dry it out and put it back in the garden, and you use it for farming because it's fertilizer. What comes in, what comes out, and comes back in again. So nature's been doing it for millions of years. Why can't we do it? So let's find more efficient ways for dealing with the waste and using it as a fertilizer for a gardening system.
Is NASA doing any development on more advanced toilets? Have you heard where they're at, or is that kind of stalled since that they're gonna decommission? There's a plan to decommission ISS.
Well, they have created a new, what they call universal waste system, which is going to be used for their missions to Mars and for future space stations that they have up there. But it's really just a modification of the same old thing. You have 2 parts. You have you have a tube for number 1, and you have a hole for number 2. Number 1, they're able to process it. Number 2, they just stick them in bags and they ziplock it and they burn it up in the atmosphere. So they haven't actually gone much further with the number 2 processing side of things. They've done all sorts of really neat experiments with plant growth, and different resources, but they haven't really gone much further than that.
Got it. Sam, I love your kitty. I'm a kitty guy too, so good to see you have a little visitor today. thanks for exploring that topic. Using the bathroom in space it's always one that seems to spark curiosity and the uninitiated. So let's to talk to you about like what's currently going on. You've got this new book release, and what else are you working on? You mentioned Burning Man, so I'm assuming since it's August 2024, you're probably starting to get prepared mentally, physically, and logistically for that. What's on the rest of the calendar for you this year?
Well, I have a lot more conferences. I have a lot more podcasts coming up. I did an interview with Rick Tumlinson a little while ago. It's actually just got released on his station. I've got 2 interviews next week popping up just before I go to the burn, and then I'll be off the grid as of the 23rd till September 5th, out there in the desert. Yes, Kat, I know. So yeah, that's gonna be fun, just being off the grid. I hope to do some talking, and I might gift a few books out to people who are interested out there, because Burning Man is a gifting economy, and so maybe I'll talk about it, just give a book or 2.
Very cool. I love asking people about their favorite science fiction as a kid, and what it is that's presently, and how it influenced your love and interest in space.
Well, I think you'll get the same answer for most of us. We've all loved the original Star Trek series, the OG Star. Hi, Cat. I know. The original Star Trek series from the 1960s, which was very influential for everyone, and was also during the height of the space race. So it was a very seminal thing, and a lot of concepts behind that. And of course, Next Generation and all those, Deep Space Nine, all those other spinoffs also influenced many of us about possibilities of a better future, the possibilities of living off world, and of course Star Wars movies as well. But Star Trek really got into it's almost like a blueprint. Where can we go from here? Can we create a Star Trek replicator? Can we create a society that can be a full spacefaring society? All these different little things. Can we build warp drives, impulse drives, all that type of stuff? The space geeks have been at it for years, trying to find ways to do that thing, and Star Trek was the influence. That was the main one.
Very cool. Is your son interest? Has he expressed any interest in these subjects?
Sometimes. I mean, he's 7 years old now. First of all,
Okay.
he's 7 years old, and
Amazing.
he is. He does like some of the space stuff that we talk about up to a point, but right now, of course, he's getting into Minecraft and building and crafting and video games and comic books and things like that. So he's starting to get into that little world, and space is a nice part of it. But of course, he likes dinosaurs and dragons and green snakes and all the things that boys like, and Nerf guns. Oh boy, Nerf guns. Yeah. So he does respect my space stuff. Whenever he has a space question, he comes to me.
Very cool. And I expect we'll see some cool things coming out from him over the years. It's been fun to through your annual postcards and other and other work to see him grow and flourish as a young dashing lad. Well, I'd love to share a little bit about. I'm working on something, Sam, that I'm releasing this summer, and it might have been helpful at the time when you were working on your zero gravity cocktail class. After the book, I got a lot of interest in people saying, "Hey, we want some educational type of content." And I did a bunch of talks at schools and universities and SEDS chapters and venture capital clubs and some businesses. And yet there were still people who said, "Hey, I want to be more involved with this. I want to do something either kind of," I sort of see this kind of bifurcated, either space enabled or space themed. You can kind of have both, and they both can be a space business. They're just different between being enabled and themed. So I've been developing some course content. I've got a mini course to help those kind of trying to figure out where they maybe want to develop a space business. It's kind of loosely called like kind of finding your North Star. and it helps people who might be searching for an idea and kind of how to find out what might be appropriate for you and with the market and timing. And then a much larger, more expansive course called Astropreneurship, which is really a virtual incubator in a box. And it might be something, whether a solopreneur or someone who's working with someone else or a very small team, before they get too far along, kind of working on all the fundamentals and really to save folks a lot of time and hopefully some money so that they have the best idea that fits the market at the time that they're developing, and help them with things around, business formation, funding, team. And then from there, it can get them to a really good place where they're ready to, go out for funding or maybe enter a formal incubator program and really have a really work on the fundamentals. So many times I see folks getting started building things and then they're like, who's going to use this, or how am I going to get this paid for? And they haven't really done the work to think that through and to get that validated. So yeah, that's kind of a current project that was sort of influenced from some of my work with the book Spaces Open for Business.
That's fantastic, because your book is a really good resource for learning the background and the history of the space and space business side of things. Learning about nanoracks and learning about Rocket Lab, and because most young people, when they're coming into this world, are like, I don't know, I just heard of SpaceX and Blue Origin. That's it. They don't realize there's dozens of other companies who are very successful and have found a niche to help get people doing things in space or science in space or developing your satellite or whatever the system is. So your book is a really good primer to help new people learn about the industry and where to go from there. And I do like the idea of some type of a workshop or seminar or a space business education program to help people get up to speed, because we're all used to the Silicon Valley mindset or the fancy startup mindset where it's like, I'll get venture capital funding for XYZ, but understanding what the market is and what the potentials are and what you can't do, because there's a lot of things you can't do and they just won't make any money. It's good to have that background, and your book is a really good jumping off point.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, my vision is to see in my lifetime thousands of more businesses of varying sizes, many, like thousands of good, small, durable, small businesses. In the US, a small business can be, I think it's up to 499 or 500 employees. So you can have a pretty big business and still be a small business by US federal standards. And I want to see thousands of small businesses flourishing here and across the planet in the space sector, building in these other areas, because we just don't need launch providers or machine shops, but there's many other areas where there's plenty of gaps, infinite opportunities to expand on and build on this in this emerging and growing industry.
Very true. Very true.
So Sam, any other areas you want to maybe touch on before we kind of wrap up today?
Well, I'm going to be speaking at the New Worlds Conference in Houston in November 1st and 2nd. So Rick Tomlinson invited me. By the way, Rick is on he wrote the foreword for my book, by the way. Really good stuff. He really understood what I was talking about. So still working on gathering some co-presenters to come with me on that particular session. So New Worlds Conference, November 1st, 2nd, 2024. I'll be there in Houston, Texas for that. And yeah, I'm just going to be promoting my book locally. I'll be at the Maker Faire in Northern California. I'll be speaking at that event. I just found out I got the invitation, so I'll be speaking at that event, and just going to be popping up all over. I'm thinking about doing a book tour in Florida next year. That's still in the works, but I might be going to different places. I still have to work on logistics. In fact, maybe if you got any contacts for me in Florida, maybe we can hook up like where science centers, Kennedy Space Center, other places where I
got some ideas for you, Sam. Yeah.
Good. I knew you had the Florida contacts.
Fantastic. Well, again, Today, I'm Robert Jacobson, and with my dear friend Samuel Coniglio the fourth, right?
The fourth,
The
yes.
fourth, and he's got his book, Creature Comforts in Space. And to find this book, you got to check out Sam's awesome website, which is Retro Futurist, and it's retro-futurist.com. Get a copy of the book, get 2 copies, makes a great gift. Hey, it even he's got a nice matching color motif with, with my book there.
Ta-da!
And I think, Sam, we need to get your book in some other languages like Korean, Japanese, I think Italian. I'm thinking of countries that would have a high appreciated design: Korea, Japan, Italy, maybe Swiss German, something like that, or Germany.
Well, my friend Taichi, as you know, from Japan, he says he was very interested in doing a Japanese translation. So maybe Japanese. I could be big in Japan for a few minutes. Ooh.
So folks from, Japan, Italy, Korea, if you're interested, any book agents out there or book publishers, reach out to Sam. We'd love to we want this book to sell really well and be widely received. And I want to get a copy of that up in space somehow, or close to space. So any folks who want to bring a copy with them on an adventure to the edge or to orbit or suborbit, talk to Sam. I'm sure he would love to have that represented there. And Sam, thanks so much for your time today. Have a safe burn out at Burning Man, some good visits and upcoming interviews, and wishing you, continued success with the book and your other work.
Thank you very much, and good luck with your project.
Thank you, Sam. Again, this is Robert Jacobson signing off.